Hey techies, and welcome to another episode of Technically Something, the show where we talk about technology, creativity, tutorials, and gaming. I'm your host, Kevin Allen, and in today's episode, we are going to talk about making your first logo. So what exactly is a logo? A logo is the identity of a company, group, or individual. It also serves as a symbol that represents their ideology. There's also a few checklist items that you need to think about when you're creating your logo. First, the need to work big or small. Second, they should be simple and, even more importantly, readable. So if you have text or any kind of written name with your logo, make sure that it's easy to read. This is the hard one. You want to try and make it memorable. So in order to do that, you need to try and make a logo that stands out from the rest of the crowd. You need to make something that actually has a unique flair to it. Finally, you need to make sure that your logo is versatile. So that way, if it's going to be embroidered, or it's going to be screen printed, or it's going to be put on the side of a plane, it looks good in any of those situations. An important thing to remember is that there are three major types of logos. The first type that we'll talk about are word marks. Word marks are exactly what they sound like. They're basically type or text. Another word for this is typography, and you can get creative with them in several ways. Now, even though it wasn't a popular game, one of my favorite examples of a great wordmark logo was from a game called Evolve. In the game, you played as 4 people versus one other player who played as a monster who was evolving. The longer that the match went on without the 4 players killing the monster would become stronger, it would evolve. So, in this wordmark, we look at it and we can see that there are 4 players versus 1. It's a small touch, but it's very effective and it's really cool. The second kind that we're going to talk about are pictorial logos, and they're probably the most popular out of all 3. Pictorial logos are generally an image represented of the name of the company. So if you think about the logo for Target, it's a Target. Or if you think about the logo for Apple computers, it's an Apple. But these are pictorial logos. They're very literal, and it's probably one of the easier things to pick up on if you're just starting out. Last but not least is the holy grail of graphic design, and that is iconography, or more or less creating an icon. These types of logos are abstract. Most of the time, you can think of an icon when you think of something like Nike, probably the closest, fastest, most recognizable brand on the planet Earth. But when you think about the brand itself, this is a rather abstract icon. If you had never heard of Nike before as a company, and you had no clue what they sold, this icon wouldn't really mean much to you. But that's exactly what is so cool about iconography, is that it can be an abstract icon with meaning behind it that also grows more popular with time. As a graphic designer, it's not always easy creating icons, but definitely is an enriching and fulfilling experience if you can hit that mark with a customer. It's really cool to do. We've gone over the foundation and some of the basic knowledge of logos. Now, I'm going to show you the process to creating your first logo and how to do it effectively. So, for these ideas, I decided to do mine digitally, but the very first thing that every graphic designer should do when they're exploring a logo is to create 10 thumbnails. Now, this is just an arbitrary number. You could do 20, you could do 3. However, I believe that doing 10 thumbs, 10 rough sketches, is a great way to explore the logo thoroughly before you go into making a refined sketch and then a final. The scenario that we'll go with here is we'll pretend that there's a new version of Pac-Man coming out, and the company that's behind developing it and all that wants us to make a new unique logo for Pac-Man. So, what I will do first to make sure I'm not repeating anything is a quick bit of research. So, pull up a Chrome browser, or any browser for that matter, and I'm going to search Pac-Man logo. Now, if I go to images, I'll see the name and a lot of the other associated pieces of art with it. Best thing that we can do here is copy, go back to Photoshop, and paste. I'm going to put this up in the corner. I'll go back to Chrome, copy, and repeat this until you have what you consider to be most of the same logos that are used. So if it's a logo that was popular and that's seen most of the time used for this product, then you can just do this research that way. I think we've gotten most of the unique stuff out of the way. Let's go back and take a look here. So the best thing that we can do now is start generating some of our own ideas. So I'm going to put all 3 of these layers into a group. I'll select them and hit Control-G, double click, and name that group reference, or just ref, R-E-F. And I'm going to create a new layer above it, call it Sketch. If you created a file that is 8.5 by 11 inches, make sure that you have a hard round brush at 12 pixels with pressure sensitivity turned on by clicking that guy. And now we can go through and start drawing some ideas. So what I'm going to do is just generate a few ideas here and speed it up so that you guys can kind of see the whole thought process. Sound good? See you in a second. So at this point, you'd have 10 thumbnails that are kind of different from one another, or you're exploring the ideas that you are drawing throughout. That's really what making thumbnails is just exploring different ideas. You start off with something simple, and then you just kind of build on top of that. And the one bit of advice that I would give for making thumbnails is that there's no such thing as a bad idea. Just put it down and explore the thought, allow it to be, and then you can move on to the next one, and maybe try again and make it better, or even move on to the next idea. Really, all making thumbnails is just allowing your brain to cough up whatever ideas it has in terms of creativity, not just like making something that's a scribble, but you're still putting some method behind trying to make the name or the logo or whatever it may be. Now, the next step that we're going to do is creating a refined sketch of whichever one we pick. In this situation, we're picking, or I'm picking, whatever logo I think looks best out of all of the thumbnails that I've created. However, in a professional situation, this is where you might send off ideas to the client and have them look, and that's why you would number all of the ideas. So that way, when they email you back or call you or anything like that, they can say, you know, I really like what you did with number 2 and 8, and I also like number 9. But all the other ones aren't really speaking to me. And that way it eliminates all of the things that they don't want. It's like throwing out a bunch of different hooks and trying to catch one fish. So really, this is a great way to explore with your client. The one that I think I like the most, probably number 9. And I think I'm going to make a version of it that is similar to number 9 and kind of combining that and number 10. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Again, I'm going to just let this process be sped up so you can see it in half the time, and then we'll get to the final step. See you in a sec. Alright, so that was kind of an adventure. You can see how where I started versus where I end is very different. It's something to think about when you're doing this stuff is that every single designer thinks and works a little bit differently. These are just steps that can help you organize your thoughts a little bit. In terms of how I come up with my ideas or what direction I take, I mean, that's just my own style. That's just my own decision making at play and what I do. Now that I have a refined sketch in Photoshop, what I'm going to do now is create the final logo in a vector format in Illustrator. Now, you might be wondering why vector? What makes vector so important? Or what is vector? I'm going to tell you. So when you're thinking about graphics, there are two major types of graphics that you can create anything in. So while I was making all my sketches in Photoshop, they were raster graphics or pixel graphics. Everything in Photoshop more or less operates off of a raster graphic setup. So if I zoom in very closely to this image, let's zoom in, eventually I'll reach a point when I see the pixels and even the grid. So you can see this is nothing but a collection of squares of color packed tightly together. That's why the resolution for this file is 300 ppi, or pixels per inch. So that means 300 pixels per inch. Now Illustrator is a little bit different, or a lot different. It uses vector graphics, which is just a fancy way of saying that it produces mathematical formulas and creates shapes based on those formulas and then fills them with color, depending on if you choose to do that. If you make a logo, it should be a vector 100% of the time, because that means you can hand over the file to whomever. It could be a printer, it could be an embroidery, it could be anything, and they still have the top-notch, highest quality version of the logo possible. And they can also do whatever they need with those formulas, especially in the case of embroidery or cutting out stickers. They'll actually have those paths for the vectors. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm going to jump into Illustrator right now. Watch closely as I use the pen tool and other shape tools to create this. Illustrator is excellent for laying out shapes and making sure that they're aligned perfectly, and you'll see some of that right now. If you haven't used Illustrator yet, don't freak out. Just kind of pay attention to all of this. I'm definitely going to have a video on getting started with Illustrator very soon. So, I'll get to it. And that's all I have to say about that. So, just to recap, the steps that I went through to do this were to explore and create 10 thumbnails, followed by a refined version of my choice from those thumbnails, and finally going into Illustrator and using all of those vector graphic tools to create the final version, which, as you can see, if I highlight all of it, has these points, but if it's still hard for you to see, I can always hit default, and that shows you all of those paths right there. So you can start to see how if I wanted to send this to be cut out into a vinyl sticker, or if I wanted it to be embroidered onto a hat, or if I wanted screen printing or anything that separates all of these sections of color, then I have them in this file. So having a vector version of your file for a logo is a must. Guys, I hope that this video was really helpful to you. Again, please stay tuned to the graphic design series. If you're new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe. I try to post as much content as I can on a fairly regular basis. And also, if you haven't visited the website, Technically Something now has its own website, complete with stuff about me, the show, access to videos, a blog, and also some merchandise. Check it out when you got some time. Alright, techies, if you have any questions about anything in this video that I didn't cover, make sure to comment down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I see it. And until next time, I'm Kevin Allen and this was Technically Something. See you guys later.